So remember the situation. And as Michael said, this is a dysfunctional family. It is probably the most dysfunctional family that we will see for a long time, probably until we get to David, because his was pretty dysfunctional as well. But again, I love how the Bible doesn't sugarcoat things. It doesn't hide people's flaws. It is very upfront with them. It's truthful with faults and the struggles of people of faith. So the situation was Jacob was supposed to marry Rachel. He had worked for her for 7 years. And the night of their wedding, Rachel's father Laban deceived him and gave Jacob Rachel's sister Leah instead. When Jacob woke up in the morning, he realized what had happened. That's a whole nother story there. But he woke up in the morning and he saw that it was Leah, and he was rightly angry, and he wondered why Laban had deceived him. Through their conversation, Jacob had agreed again then to marry Rachel. As soon as the week-long celebration of marriage was over, he would marry Rachel, and then he would work another 7 years for Laban. Leah then had 4 sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And Rachel didn't have any children. In this time and place, a woman's value was in her ability to have children. And so Rachel felt the weight of this. She felt what was going on. She was the one that Jacob loved. That was obvious. But she felt the burden, and she was jealous of her sister Leah. Right? It wasn't enough that Rachel was loved and Leah was not. It wasn't enough that Rachel was the favored one in the family and Leah was not loved at all. As we saw last week, it was Jacob loved Rachel rather than Leah. He didn't love Leah. But Rachel wanted more. She wasn't happy for her sister. She had no joy in Leah's children. She was jealous and envious. This is a bad situation. Envy is a dangerous thing. It's grieving at the good of another. I mean, think about this. Envy tells us that God has been more gracious to somebody else than he's been to us. Envy is saying God is not good enough, or he's not good to us. It's a lack of appreciation for what God has done in our own lives. It demands that he does more. What he has given another, we want him to give to us. We look at somebody's life, we look at somebody's wealth, we look at somebody's situation, and we say, that's what I want. God, you have been unkind to me because you have given them what I want. Matthew Henry, speaking of this passage, says of envy, there is no sin more offensive to God, nor more injurious to our neighbor and ourselves. Envy will destroy a person and destroy relationships. When it comes to envy, there's no logic, there's no faith. The foundation of envy is pride. And that's what Rachel is dealing with. Because Leah had children and Rachel did not, Rachel became angry with Jacob. She's quite dramatic in this, and we all know that drama is usually helpful for difficult conversations. So she said, "Give me children or I shall die. Give me children or I shall die." And as we'll see in this passage, it isn't from a lack of trying. You can figure that out in your own head. Rachel or Leah will later barter to have Jacob sleep with her. It's pretty clear that Jacob is with Rachel much more often than Leah. And so Rachel is taking the blame on to Jacob. She is giving, there's no blame here So we're clear, there's no blame for any person. God is the one who is sovereign, and yet she is blaming her husband. She is angry, and she's taking it out on somebody else. But as we'll see, with Rachel, one child isn't enough. She will immediately want another. See, the problem is when we think that something will satisfy us, we are believing a lie. When we think something in the world will give us what we want, we are believing a lie. Nothing will satisfy our desires when we want anything other than God Himself. Nothing in this world can satisfy us. French physicist, mathematician, philosopher Blaise Pascal said, "There is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of each man which cannot be satisfied by any created thing, but only by God the Creator made known through Jesus Christ." There is nothing in this world that can satisfy the desire that God has put inside each of us. And yet we look to the world continually. But notice in this passage, instead of praying, Rachel complained to Jacob. And Jacob doesn't pray for her. Instead, his anger was kindled against her. It wasn't his fault. Like, don't blame me for something that's not my fault. And there's no indication in here that Jacob prayed for Rachel. In the same way that Abraham prayed for Sarah and Isaac prayed for Rebekah, this did not happen in this situation. Yet, at the same time, Jacob understood that God is sovereign. He is sovereign over childbirth. We see in verse 2, "Am I in the place of God who has withheld from you fruit of your womb?" Jacob's response was firm, and rightly so. Yet, he didn't pray. As I was going through this week, it struck me how much I am like Jacob. Like, I can run and rest in God's sovereignty. It is such a comfortable place to be. No matter what's going on in the world, no matter what's going on in our lives, we can rest that God is sovereign. And yet, so much like Jacob, I usually stop there. I don't take my concerns to God in prayer. And I don't understand why that's the case. I will sit here and I will talk about how important prayer is, and it is. And yet it is not something that comes natural to me. I have to force myself to do it. It makes no sense. Like, how depraved are we as people when we know what we need? We know who we need. We know who is in control. We know who is sovereign. We know who loves us more than anything, and yet at the same time, we just sit back. I got this. I don't have control over it. Rachel put Jacob in God's place. But Jacob knew that there were things that only God could do. And it's a sin to look to anybody or anything else for what you need. Jacob recognized God's providence in the situation. And he was very firm with Rachel. Now, to be fair, there are probably better ways of talking through the issue than meeting anger with anger. Surely Jacob was disappointed for Rachel. He loved her. He wanted her to be happy. But he also understood that he was not in control. See, the difficulties that Jacob had experienced were leading him to see God's sovereignty. They were leading him to trust in God's providence. They were leading him where he needed to go. The one who took the birthright by deception. The one who single-handedly moved the stone that took multiple people to move was now learning to trust God. It's a journey. It's a process. And Jacob is on this journey, and we can see it clearly how he lives his life, and he's figuring this out. Rachel didn't have any kids, so she had a great idea. Right? This has worked so well in the family in the past. Rachel said, "Here, take my servant Bilhah and have children with her." Again, we saw this before with Sarah and Hagar. It was a common thing in the time. Like, we can look at this and say, that is crazy, but it was a common occurrence. It wasn't something that was rare. The law was that if a wife could not have children, then she could give her servant to her husband as a wife, and then the servant's children would belong to the wife. So as Rachel's going through this pain, she sees her servant Bilhah as an answer, but not one bit concerned about Bilhah in this whole situation. What would it be like to have a child and then have that child belong to somebody else? To have that child taken away from you, not because of anything you have done, but because you're a lower status. In Rachel's mind, she could satisfy her desire through Bilhah. Notice, verse 3, Rachel's focus on herself. She gave Bilhah to Jacob so that she, Bilhah, may give birth on my behalf. Rachel. She saw Bilhah as the answer to the problem. Bilhah conceived, and Leah named this son Dan. See that Leah named him because the son belonged to Rachel. God has judged me and has heard my voice and given me a son. This is the first reference to prayer by Rachel. Her prayers are not recorded, but God heard her voice, meaning that she had prayed. The word judged here means vindicated. God vindicated her. He heard her prayer and she was vindicated. Bilhah conceived again, and Rachel named him Naphtali. With mighty wrestlings, I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed. See, Rachel saw her life as an intense battle. The word Elohim is actually in this description of wrestling because it was such a powerful wrestling in her mind. She and her sister were at odds, constantly struggling with each other. A mighty wrestling. Having children should be a blessing to parents, but for Jacob's family, it was a competition. It was a way to one-up the sister. It was a way to get even. It was a way to battle with each other. The sons, Jacob's sons from different mothers, were set against each other from birth. They were opposed to each other from birth. When we go on in Genesis and we see the struggle that Jacob's sons had with each other, it makes perfect sense. It's no wonder that the brothers will not like Rachel's sons because the parents put this on them. So the passage turns to Leah now in verse 9. Leah was no longer having children. Possibly she was unable. But again, through the passage, it seems more likely that the opportunity was not there. But not to be outdone by Rachel, she gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob as a wife. She didn't want Rachel to have satisfaction. She didn't want Rachel to feel like she had one-upped her sister. So Zilpah had a son, and Leah named him Gad. Good fortune has come. Good fortune has come upon me. Zilpah had a second son, and Leah named him Asher. Happy am I, for women have called me happy. Leah's concern was also what others thought of her. It wasn't in who she was as a child of God. It wasn't in God himself. It was in what others thought about her. See, a struggle of humanity that we all have is the desire of praise for others. We desire the praise of others more often than we desire our own holiness or our own contentment with God. We want to fit in. We want to be liked. We want to be alike. We want to We want to have our group. We want to be praised. St. Augustine, in his book, The Confessions, talked about how his friends would be over here talking about the bad things that they had done, the things that they stole, or the people that they hurt. And he talked about how he then lied and created these stories of things that he didn't actually do, but he told people he did so that they would like him more. He made himself sound more wicked than he really was so that he would fit in, so that he would be liked, so that he would be praised. This is a struggle that humanity has had since the Garden of Eden. But notice that in neither of these births did Leah mention God. See, there's a mixture of idolatry, of paganism, with the worship of Yahweh in Jacob's family. And we'll see it more as we go on. They're taking these different things and they're piecing them together. Remember, at the time, each area of the world worshiped their own God. And so it wasn't a strange thing to start mixing in religions or ideas or idols or gods of different areas and worship them all together, because the more you worship, the better off you would be, in theory. The name Asher is similar to an Assyrian god. It's also possibly the masculine form of the Canaanite god Asherah. So his name has this connotation of pagan worship. But what we see here in this situation is a family that is fighting for the love and the attention of the father, of Jacob, of the husband. Leah is unloved but has children. Rachel is loved but has no children of her own. Laban's actions have serious consequences. He pitted these two sisters against each other at their wedding. Jacob's actions have serious consequences. He loved Rachel and made that very obvious, and he did not love Leah, and he made that very obvious. Again, this is a seriously dysfunctional family, and it is not loving. It is not a happy place. Verse 14 begins this seemingly odd section talking about mandrakes. Reuben, who seems to be a small child around the age of 5 to 7, in that range, went out in the field and he found some wild mandrakes. Mandrakes were not common in this area of the world, but there was a belief that mandrakes helped with fertility. There was a belief that if you ate mandrakes, then you would be more likely to bear children. The Hebrew and Greek name is love apples. Hey, Mom, I found some love apples. Like, that was the thought. And so Reuben brings them in to Leah. Rachel sees them and she wants them. Rachel and Leah both want children, and yet there is no serious praying or reliance on Yahweh at this point. They were looking at the pagan idea of fertility. They were looking at the pagan ways of having children. They were not resting in Yahweh. They were not really praying. In this, Moses is showing us the struggle this family is having with each other and with trusting Yahweh. Rachel and Leah had no concern for one another. They are in constant conflict. The sibling rivalry is felt in this family for years to come. So Leah will not give these mandrakes away for free. Give me your mandrakes. No. She accuses Rachel of stealing her husband. Which, isn't that ironic? Like, she's actually the one who snuck in, who pretended to be Rachel. She is the one, arguably, who stole the husband. Leah married by a deception. It's not enough that you stole my husband. Again, the emotions don't allow the sisters to see the situation clearly or logically. And so Rachel essentially prostitutes Jacob for the mandrakes. It's a great situation. It's a relationship built on love and commitment to one another. It's actually a relationship, it's a family built on strife and competition. So Jacob is given to Leah for time in exchange for the mandrakes, and she conceives, and we finally see an acknowledgement of God. She named her fifth son Issachar, because God has given me my wages, because I gave my servant to my husband. God has given me my wages. The root word for Issachar means hired. And the implication in this is that Jacob normally slept with Rachel, but Leah hired him. And that's Issachar's name. Leah conceived again and named her sixth son Zebulun. God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will love me. Now is emphatic. Finally, my husband will love me. Or at last, my husband will love me. It is clear that she understood her place with Jacob. She knew where she stood. And she desperately, desperately wanted her husband's approval and affection. What a sad situation it was for Leah. Just desperately wanting her husband's love. And she was hoping that having 6 sons would do the trick. It then tells us that she had a daughter, Dinah. It doesn't tell us when Dinah was born. It doesn't tell us how old the others were or anything. It is just simply introducing Dinah to our lives because she plays an important role. She's a victim of rape. And the events surrounding that situation has a significant impact because 2 of her brothers react in a way that will cause some things to happen and put Judah as the one, as the oldest, as the one who would be the line of the Messiah. And so Moses here is introducing us to Dinah. Jacob had other daughters. We just aren't told about them. We know that he had daughters because there are times where it says his sons and daughters. But the events surrounding Dinah are significant. But notice that the one who gave away the mandrakes has 3 more children. See, Moses, again, communicating that God is sovereign over procreation, not mandrakes. No magic potion, no nothing. It is God. It is not human will or cunning. It is God who does it. The sisters were hoping in the wrong thing. Perhaps this is why Leah could finally recognize God's work in her childbirth. It is God who did this. Verse 22 tells us that God remembered Rachel. Again, the word remembered does not mean that God forgot about Rachel. Remember when we talked about the flood, it said that God remembered Noah. It's not that he forgot. It's telling us that God is about to show grace. He's about to act. He's about to do something. So God listened to Rachel and he opened her womb. That God listened shows us again that Rachel was finally praying. The mandrakes didn't work. Her anger with Jacob didn't work. So Rachel named her son Joseph. It's a play on words. There's 2 Hebrew words that are combined in the name of Joseph. It's may he add and taken away. God has taken away Rachel's reproach by giving her a son. But Rachel was not content. At the birth of her son, she names him Joseph, saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." It's interesting that this is the first use of the covenant name of God, Yahweh, by any of Rachel's wives or Jacob's wives. It's the first time any of them say Yahweh. And she uses it by immediately wanting more. When we get what we want, it's never enough. We always want more. We get a new car, and then we see a newer car or a nicer car. We see, we get a bonus, and we know somebody else that got a bigger bonus. Whatever it is, we want more. And that was Rachel. But as we wrap up this section, it seems as though all of what we just read takes place in the 7 years that Jacob worked for Laban. So he worked for 7 years, then he got married, then worked another 7 years. This is the second 7 years. It could have been more, but as we'll see next week, it's after the birth of Joseph that Jacob asked Laban to be let go, to be released from his work, from his promise. Surely there's a lot going on during this time. We don't know what Jacob was doing. We know that he was working. We don't know of his interactions with Laban. We'll see some glimpses later on of what was going on. We know nothing about the home life other than it was a disaster. But he had 11 sons born. This is how we are introduced to 11 of the 12 tribes of Israel. This is not a good situation. The nation of Israel did not have a good start. It was not a time of unity, of togetherness. But as we've talked throughout our study in Genesis, right, Genesis is the book of beginnings. That's what Genesis means, the beginnings. This is the beginning of the nation of Israel. This is the foundation of the nation, but it's also the beginning of redemption. And as we move forward, it's important to see what God used to start this nation, to start his favored nation. His chosen people were started in this situation. Isn't it crazy that the nation of Israel is still around today? Like, this is their foundation. This is not a good start. And yet, we're 4,000 years later, 5,000 years later, and it's still around. And God can do crazy things. See, it's not a good start, but take heart, because God doesn't look for the perfect. He doesn't look for the best. He doesn't look for the most likely people to accomplish his work. In 1 Corinthians 1, 20 through 31, this is what Paul wrote. Who is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand a sign and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to the Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. Who is the one who is wise? Who is the one that makes sense? Verse 26, for consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to the worldly standards. Not many of you were powerful. Not many were noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. He chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. He chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being may boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. God does not pick the ones that we think he should pick. And when you know that, look in the mirror. See, as we move forward, we see the beginning of this messed up family, but as we move forward, we will see amazing redemption that happens. It's the book of beginnings. It's the book of the nation, but it's also, or the beginning of the nation, it's also the beginning of redemption. See, He is the God who redeems, and we will see an amazing story of redemption in God's chosen family. They have to go through difficulties. They have to go through trials, many of which are their own doing. But God uses these situations to break the stubborn selfishness of this family. He uses these situations to bring them to Him. He is the God who redeems. Find in this peace, find joy. You are able to be used by God for His works if you submit to Him. You don't have to be the best. You don't have to be the strongest. You don't have to be the fastest. You don't have to be the most wealthy. You just have to be willing to be used. Submit to Him. See, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. You will be saved. You will be redeemed. And you will be used by Him for His kingdom and His glory.